All right, dramatic countdown over. Dr. Poppy Gibson, thank you so much for coming on today.
Excited to talk to you. I've been a fan of your podcast for a while. So
Oh, thank you.
let's
All right. So one thing I notice is usually when I come across academics online, I don't even know if you necessarily just define yourself as an academic, but you have a very broad range of interest from what I've seen of the things you're writing about, the things that you've done. So I guess how have potentially like your academic flavors changed over the past 5, 10 years? And like, what are the things that you've been writing about, you've been most interested in, and like, what are you kind of seeking to change in the field of education?
Mr. Clark After Dark is also brought to you by Luxy. That's Luxy. Luxy sets the standard for modern dating that allows you to be truly aware of the intentions and background of any potential match. Swiping through different dating apps can be tiring. You can leave with a constant feeling of disappointment after seeing the leftovers in your dating pool. With Luxy, an exclusive platform for those with high standards and boasts only a 10 to 15% acceptance rate, as well as a distinctive income verification feature if you choose to use it. You can end your search for the right dating app and start focusing on finding the right person for you instead. Download the app today to see if you qualify for a better chance of finding your person. And now, hope you guys enjoy the show.
Well, yeah, so it's a big question. I think as teachers, we're all about growth, right? I think we're helping our students to grow. And so it's natural that we grow alongside. So I think for me, it's just been about through my career, checking in with myself, like, is this still bringing me joy? Is this still meeting my skill set? Am I still in the best classroom for me? And just over time, whenever I've started to feel like the joy isn't 100%, or 99%, then I've always thought maybe something else is out there. So I guess my career's shifted as I've grown, and that's taken me from, I started off in year 2, so the children were 6 years old. That was my first teaching group. Moved up to
Bold
year
move.
5. So the older ones are like 10 in year 5 here in London. And then ended up after a few years moved to a boys' school. Then I moved to a girls' school. So kind of always just moved around where I was interested in seeing how the children work in a single sex school. And then moved around private schools and then as well as our mainstream schools. So I think as teachers, we should always be curious. So I've always just been ready to try a new school, try a new classroom. You realize children are the same anywhere.
Yeah.
Just, their challenges and their demographic is different, but they're still children. And then it just took me now into university work. So for 8 years, I've been a university lecturer, but working in primary education. So kind of training the next generation of teachers. But I guess it just changed because I changed. And I think as teachers, we should always just follow our hearts. That's why we're in it, isn't it? Because we're passionate. So just continue to check in where your passion lies.
Yeah, I think there's a few things I want to unpack there, but I do think eventually it would be really cool to try to like teach newer teachers, because those are kind of like your expert learners who really want to learn. So it's probably actually super fun once you kind of actually get into the run of that. But you went from an all-girls school to an all-boys school. Can you tell me a little bit about like going from, I guess, a co-ed to how are they different? Like, what were kind of the things you weren't expecting that kind of came out of those experiences?
No one's ever asked me that question. I think what's really different, and obviously I'm based like in London and England, so it's different everywhere culturally, but I didn't realize what a big stereotypical difference there would be. So I saw a really big difference at the girls' school. The girls would fall over. The supervisors, oh my goodness, are you okay? Let me see. Here's a plaster. Here's a sticker for being a good girl. You're so brave. And I moved to the boys' school, and I'd see boys just like skidding down the gravel, and then the supervisor would be watching them and just wait and see. They got up, they dusted themselves off they go, they're fine. I'm not even going to check in with them. And that was really, I'm generalizing. There were those odd children that were treated differently, but generally the way that we were responding to children in a girls' school versus a boys' school was very generally stereotypically how we see, girls being more gentle and needing more nurturing, boys, being more independent. And again, I'm generalizing, but there definitely was something there, particularly at playtime and as well the games. So you'd see the girls doing a lot of, I'm a princess queen, running around with imaginary wands in the playground. And then you saw boys, the teacher would just bring out a bag of footballs and 90% of the boys would engage with that, and then maybe 10% are on the chess tables. Like, very different. I don't know if you've ever seen, there was this really interesting study they did here with the BBC in England, where it's so good. Like, I'll have to try send you the clip after the
Please,
show.
yeah.
But they got some babies, like toddlers, and they dressed the toddler in I don't know why they did this actually, but they dressed the toddler in the wrong gender typical clothes. So they had a baby boy, they put him in a pink dress, and then they brought in participants for the study who didn't, I think they didn't know everything. They just knew it was something about playing with children. So they would come in and they saw this baby in the pink dress, and it was really interesting. Like 9 out of 10 participants were giving this baby the doll. There was like a toy box of toys, and they were giving them the doll. They were, I think it was like a play kettle or something, and they were the teddy, the soft teddy. And then they did the same experiment where they put a baby girl in blue clothes, and then when the participants came in, they were giving them the engineering style toys, like the building block and making the rocket fly around. And it was so interesting. At the end, they reveal that the babies were in the wrong clothes, and that actually they had these stereotypical biases because they had given them different selections of toys. It was so interesting. And I think that even though we try and say we're not worried about stereotypes, everyone can play with everything, anyone can wear anything, maybe for some of us, because of how we've brought up, we do have some of those ingrained biases that, you know, we lean towards. But yeah, there's definitely something there in how we treated the children.
Yeah, I always think it's like I have my instinctual response, but then I have my critical response of like, oh, I should not be like responding in these classic ways that are just ingrained in you growing up. And you're like, oh, I can actually treat people in similar ways. That's a crazy idea. And but I guess another part to add on to that is, did you ever find like the way you were treated differently by like your all girl students versus your all boy students? Of like, I guess I kind of envision, again, kind of getting into the general stereotypes, like the boys wouldn't be as open to like hearing you maybe manage them, if that kind of makes sense, versus the girls.
Yeah, it's interesting. And again, I'm generalizing a lot
here. Yeah.
But certainly, again, when you're working in private schools in the UK, because of the nature of a lot of the parents, they'll be working away, they'll employ an au pair or a nanny who will be bringing the children to school, picking the children up, doing the homework with them. And obviously many, again, generalizing, many au pairs and nannies here in the UK are, you know, younger women. So sometimes you did almost feel like a hired help because they were brought to school by someone who kind of looked like you looked after them all day, and then they were picked up by the nanny. And that was actually the biggest challenge, I would say. You almost felt like, for some parents and carers, because they pay the fees in those schools, you do sometimes feel like the customer is always right. Whereas in mainstream schools, where there's no fee paying, you feel like maybe it's more of a partnership. Again, I've had amazing parents in all schools I've worked at. There's certainly something in there where money's involved. Education becomes a transaction, it becomes a product instead of a process. And that's a really interesting dynamic.
Interesting. I've never actually worked in a private setting myself. Like, I teach in Canada, and I think for the most part, it's a lot less privatized schools. Like, I would say maybe like 2 to 3%, even if that, are private here. And a lot of the public, there's a word for it. There's a lot of schools, especially in the Calgary area in Alberta, where they would have like leadership focuses or something like that, where you would go there for that type of education, but they would still use the public curriculum, if that makes sense, because that's how you would get funding. But I guess is London more similar to the US in the sense of there is a lot more like private schools? Is it like 50-50? Because honestly, all of the friends that I have in Canada that have taught in the UK, they're like, oh, I taught in this random private school in this town, Shire or something. And they're like, I have no idea. I'm like, okay, cool. But I guess that's kind of the narrative I hear a lot more coming out of people who have taught that I know in England.
I mean, obviously, everything varies so much in the UK, considering we're so small. We have such a diverse range. It's normal that most counties would have within them, you know, some mainstream schools, some grammar schools, some private schools. So we have like a shifting scale. But I think the thing you notice most in London is the real two ends of the scale back to back. So there's a really famous place in London called Tower Hamlets, which is like one of the highest areas of poverty. So there we would have nearly all children on free school meals, where the school has to provide the meal, the government has to pay the children to have food, they get food vouchers. And then that can be literally next door to one of the feeders for Eton, where probably all the prime ministers went. So particularly in London, you do see the most rich families next to those that are really on the breadline. But I would say a private school anywhere is definitely in its own bubble, wherever it is in the UK. Probably similar over there. Very much its own little microcosm. And that's one reason why, for me personally, I went to private school. My mum worked really hard to save up to send me to private school. So I went to a girls' primary. I think that's why I was interested to go back and teach there. And I went to a co-ed secondary, but still private. Although I hated school, I was rubbish. I literally scraped out with just what I needed to get into university. But for me, I didn't think it gave me a view of the real world. And so for my children, I've got 3 kids, I always thought, I think for them, a mainstream setting is going to help them learn more about the world. They're going to see a wider diversity of people from all different backgrounds and cultures. And I just think it seemed more real world than being this very isolated place. But again, every child is different. Every child will work best in a different setting. But it certainly was interesting seeing a whole range of them.
I don't mean to kind of hammer too many classic teacher cliches here right off the hop, but like I know, because again, I was a brutal student in high school as well. I tell the students like in grade 7, I'm like, guess what my mark was in English after our first term? And they're like, oh, I don't know. I was like 19%. Like it wasn't good. Like it was very low. High school was a whole other thing.
Fun. What do they like? Believe it.
Yeah, now I teach literacy, but I guess in a weird way, do you think that being a worse student made you a better teacher?
I think for some of us, it's why we want to go back and change it, isn't it? Is that your reason?
I would say it's definitely part of this, like, okay, there's something more that can potentially come out of this, and maybe I can actually go back and make that difference in some way. I would say that's kind of the classic thing for me, but did you find that to be your case as well?
I think so. And I think for any teacher, it's either you go into teaching for one or two reasons. One, just because you loved it and you want to be part of the teaching community. But secondly, because you had a really rough deal. You feel like the teachers did not nurture you. They didn't get to know you. And you want to be the person that goes back and gives that love and support back to young people. So it sounds like we're in that second camp.
Yeah, the two extremes were like, we're gonna figure something out here. So I know that a lot of your work has included social media with young girls, and I kind of want to get a little bit into that. But before, I noticed actually when I was looking through that it was kids ages 8 to 11 that you were focusing on, which I guess to me, I was still thinking of like social media with young girls as being like 15 and 16-year-olds, not like my niece who's 8. Like potentially being on Instagram. Like I did not think about
Is she? Do you
being
know if
that.
she is?
Yeah,
Does she have a phone?
she's not. I hope not. I had social media without telling my parents when it first came out, so I'm sure that maybe there's a way to get around it, which is kind of scary. But I guess a bit of a preamble. What I've kind of noticed in the past decade when it came to the initial social media research is, I'm going to give like some general claims here, is that we started to see it was like an obvious expansion of people comparing themselves to one another, which increasingly made them more depressed and then more suicidal as a result. Was that kind of the chain that you saw? But I guess, was there anything different that you found in looking at even the younger age group as well?
So I thought that's what I would find in this study, because we do know social media definitely has this dark side. And when you're so young and vulnerable, I think even as adults, we're vulnerable on social media, aren't we? It just takes that one person's negative comment. I mean, you're amazing on socials. I love your stuff. And I don't imagine you get any trolls. But even like for me as an adult, who knows a lot about using social media, because it was literally my PhD. Even for me, I've got better at it, but it still hurts. Like, it's not about you. It's about that person who's feeling insecure and they're trying to say something mean to you. They don't even know you. It hurts as an adult. So I was really interested, how are these very young girls? And so 8 to 11 is the higher end of primary school here, just before they go to secondary school. So I thought, let's see what's going on there. And a lot of our provision in the UK is awful, apart from those beacons of schools that are doing great stuff around social media. But generally, as you say, Lucas, because a lot, Instagram, you want to be 13, So if children are using it, they haven't put in a fake birthday, so they already know it's not quite right. They're using it, so they're probably doing it secretly. So this is a big problem here in the UK. So I just wanted to see what was going on. But interestingly, I actually found, and to put it in context, it was at a private girls' school where I collected my data. It was not negative for those girls, and actually they found the internet to be empowering. They found the internet to give them connection in what they felt was a very isolated landscape, because again, many of them were brought by an au pair, go to school, go to clubs, go home. Some of them didn't see their parents frequently because their parents, were working really hard as professional people. Mm-hmm. And so actually, if they could, on their device, connect with friends, it was actually a way to stay connected for them. So there was something in there around connection, collaboration. And the main one that came out was ambition. So I had one girl who was only 11 in my study. So I don't know what we were doing at 11, climbing a tree, riding a bike down a road. But this girl at 11, because she was using Instagram frequently, and she's seen how branding worked and how sales worked, she already had ideas of making her own clothing brand. And she was saving up to get a printing press to print T-shirts. And I was like, wow. She knew,
okay.
She couldn't have afforded to hire a shop front on a high street, but she could afford to print up stuff in her bedroom and ship it. So it actually showed me that social media was something more for these children than what I think we imagine it might be. And we know that the media loves to show the negatives. And there are some really awful things that do happen when people, get it into the wrong dark parts of the internet. But if we have open conversations with children and guide them, then for these young girls in my study, generally, it was a really exciting, amazing space for them.
Interesting, because I've had a few conversations with people who say we shouldn't just be talking about social media as it's only causing problems. And obviously we look for problems because it's interesting, because we're trying to solve these things, and that's understandable too. But you also never get the side of okay, well, social media is actually probably the most powerful tool for at least sharing creativity for
But that's
I guess
how
ever.
This is how
we are literally here. Yeah, so all these different connections are coming together. So I guess have you ever done work when it comes to is 8 to 11 almost like a pre-puberty non-mate competitive years? Is that a part that maybe plays into more of the friendly collaboration thing? Is there anything to that at all that maybe you gave thought to? I don't know what because again as students are hitting puberty at 12 and 13 and 14 more, so I can kind of see that starting to change the way that they you see more of the what's the word for it, the relational aggression on social media and trying to ruin reputations more so. Did you I guess what are your thoughts on that, and did you see anything along those lines?
I think that's a really thoughtful point. I think they were most of them at that pre-puberty stage. So certainly it's a very different dynamic to when they hit secondary school, when the hormones kick in. But I think that's kind of why we need to raise awareness that if we're helping children navigate these tools younger, instead of just leaving them to navigate themselves, because I don't know about you, but for me, I guess I started using social media, I don't know, in my late 20s. I feel like I'm super old and it wasn't around before that. Maybe in my 20s, maybe a university. But for most of us, we just figure it out by using it, right? See how other people are using it, mimic that. And that's what a lot of these young girls were doing, was seeing how people were looking at things. I did a really interesting part of my study was a discourse analysis. So I looked at how children were commenting. You do see this now, actually, even on Instagram for adults. If one person, for example, would put a heart, then the other person would comment on the picture with a heart, and the other person would comment with a heart. There's something there around wanting to fit in, about mimicking. So it's about teaching our children to be in the right spaces and mimic the right things. But for a lot of children that are using social media covertly, they're not being supported. They're not having also the most important part, the output. If they do see something that upsets them, or if someone upsets them, if they're having to do it all under wraps, they don't have someone to talk to about if they are upset. So with my children, I'm strict in one way and open in the other. So I've always said they'll never have a phone till they go to secondary school, so 11. So I certainly do believe that children, in my opinion, do not need a phone in the primary school. The only reason I could foresee it is some children do walk home in year 6 when they're 11, and maybe they would need a phone to communicate with their family. But for me, my children know that is the rule. I've done it with my oldest. He got a phone at 11. My middle son is 10. He's waiting to turn 11 to get a phone. He knows. Like, I think you have to have those hard boundaries. But then once my son got his phone at 11, so my oldest son is 13 now. He's called Otto. Once Otto got his phone, I was like, use it how you want. And we talk very openly about what he's chosen to download or what he goes on. I don't police his phone, but certainly we do have conversations around, what bad things could happen, what could upset you, how you need to treat others, how you leave a digital footprint in everything you do. So it's about having those open conversations, which we started when he was 11. And as a result, and I know, again, you may have seen here in the UK, there's been a petition to ban smartphones in under 16s. But actually, I think for him, his dream is to go to Japan. He downloaded Duolingo, the language app. Many other amazing apps are available. And he's been learning it. He showed me his streak, 348 days last night. He does it every night before bed and shows me his streak. 348 days. And he can now order off the menu in Japanese when we go for sushi. It's amazing. And he chose to do that off his own back. He does 5 minutes every night. And so his phone is giving him, and the social media aspect, his friends have joined as well. So there's a little leaderboard. This is things
that's cool. I didn't know you could compete on it. That's sweet.
Yeah, you can. And so I guess giving them a tool and then letting them learn, but also supporting them. This is what we need to do. And so I guess my study showed that if we have supportive conversations and make space, it can be the most amazing tool. You're right. It's an amazing tool. I know you love using it because I see your content and I love using it. So why should we think children wouldn't? But we just need to remember they're vulnerable and support them in doing so.
Well, yeah, because I actually didn't have social media at all for about a year and a half. I deleted everything and I really enjoyed it. But when I started the podcast,
how long ago was it?
So I started this podcast in September of 2023. This is about a year and a half ago. And I think I started, I downloaded Instagram it was just Facebook and I think Twitter, Twitter at the time, just to post content on. So that would have been June of 2023. But I would say from June to the previous, January, actually. So it was a year and a half. It was the June to January 2022. Got the Christmas one year, just deleted everything. And I think it was a good break because there is something to be my wife would be are you seeing this crazy thing? I'm no, I'm chilling in my house. I'm reading my book. I don't know, nothing's really happening to me right now. So it's all good. But I also love social media in the sense of I hate that I doom scroll because I'm as vulnerable to anyone as just going through random content. I'm I've been on this for 18 minutes and I didn't even realize. But I do love just sharing stuff and things I want to learn about and sharing with people. I think that's just what every teacher likes to do anyway. But you're almost kind of bringing up a point where should there be a time in grade 7 or year 7 where your media literacy course is actually creating your Instagram and your TikTok accounts?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And working with your teacher and signing up and being okay, we're going to figure out what are the dangers of this? How can this be used inappropriately? When you see something written in text, it's going to make you feel a certain way versus when someone says it to you. You're actually kind of getting into what they are going to see that they're going to react to without even realizing. Yeah, I think that's fascinating. I like that you have a more positive spinning. So I thought you were going to say the suicide rates of 8-year-olds went up 48%. And I was oh my God, what are we doing? But it's interesting to kind of see the split dynamic there a little bit.
And until we ask children their opinion, how do we know? If we're just seeing where there are tragic cases where children have completed suicide because of something that happened online, these are the things that become sensationalized. We're forgetting actually those children who feel isolated at home, but they can talk to a friend on an app, and for them it's nurturing their well-being. And I think it's definitely just about role modeling as well. So things like my children know that if we're eating, I'm not going to have my phone anywhere near me. I wouldn't check my phone during mealtime. So it's about also being that role model. And another thing that's big for me is never checking my phone when my kids are talking to me, because I don't know about you. I hate when my friends do that or when anyone, if I'm talking to someone and they're checking their phone or they're on their phone, I'll actually just stop talking because I find it super rude, and I wouldn't do it to anyone else. Like I wouldn't. So I love being on my phone, but if someone's in the room with me, I'm present. And so it's showing my kids that as well. I know you love being on your phone, but we're having a conversation now, phones down. Actually, my husband and I, it must have been about a month ago, we were like, do you know what? Like, phones away, let's just have a whole night. We're not even going to check our phone. And we're really good. Like, we don't check our phones around each other. But I was like, do you know what? I'm not even going to check in on anything. We had an amazing night, had a nice meal, watched a movie, went to bed, woke up the next day. We missed the Northern Lights here in England. Like, I went back on social media. I was like, I'm sure I didn't miss anything for like 12 hours. And everyone was like, we saw the Northern Lights in London, and like all these pictures of like pink skies. I looked at my husband, I was like, what? What's the chance? But it actually felt fine. Like, do you know what? We survived. It's fine. There'll be more opportunities. It just made us laugh because it also shows you how valuable social media is in reminding you of things going on. Often we've noticed there's going to be a comet storm or something. My middle son loves space. It teaches you stuff that you wouldn't hear about in other spaces.
Well, and that's actually you engaging in the community. That's kind of what it's supposed to be like. Oh, we're all seeing this collective thing that's kind of like bringing us together in the cheesiest way possible. But like my like my wife and I will do like, I'll put my phone on the island, but I almost find like I just exchange screens still. Like, I'll put my phone down, but then my wife and I like watch something on TV. Like, that's kind of the classic like checking out, if you will. But yeah, I guess that's just a new norm, I feel, for most people. But so your new book that just came out yesterday, I want to talk a little bit about some of the topics in there. So you're talking about like kind of facilitating students to those tough conversations. So I think I wrote down some of the topics that were in it. So you're talking about things like sex and relationships. And I think I feel like the cliches to talk about kind of like the puritanical attitudes that kind of come into how we talk about things. And obviously there has to be very strict boundaries when you're a teacher talking about anything sexual related with students that are obviously under 18. So I guess, how do you bring students through those conversations? And I guess, what kind of things do you think belong in the classroom?
Yeah, good question. Also, thanks for mentioning our book. Yeah, the sex and relationships chapter was a toughie, but honestly, they were all difficult because all the topics in our book are things that maybe teachers aren't always sure how to approach. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned a lot today, suicidal ideations. That's one of the chapter. How do you support a student with suicidal ideations? And again, it's not pink and fluffy. It's not something we want to associate with teaching, that you will have to talk about suicide. But the truth is that for so many people that you meet, this may be a part of their mental health journey. So the sex and relationships one, and as you say, it's tricky because the book's aimed at teachers who are teaching people under, 16, 18. The main thread of all the chapters really is having that safe space. So if you're creating a space where your children, your young people want to listen to you, this is important. This is probably the thread of the whole podcast, right? It's about mutual respect. So if you're creating a space where they want to listen to you and they trust you and they're happy to speak up, that's the main thing. So for any complex issue, if you're creating a space of communication, and that's you'll see now why I love social media, because it gives you a different space to communicate in. This will give you the platform to talk about anything. Mm-hmm. And again, we might think, why are we talking about that when the children might not be in a sexual relationship themselves? But they've probably been around it. They've probably been growing up. They might have seen their parent or carer, we've all had someone walk in at some point, I'm sure, walk into the bedroom or seen something on TV, or they've seen something on social media. So we can't think that children have not any, knowledge of sex and relationships, because even if they haven't been in one themselves, they may have seen something or been told something by a peer. I remember, I don't know, maybe that's off limits to say, but I remember being 11. So I told you I went to a girls' school, went into a secondary school with the boys, and someone asked me, have you ever done such and such, which was like a lewd sexual thing. And I didn't even know what it was. And I went, yeah, I think so. And I didn't even know what it was. And like, so you can't, even if you're the best parent or parent in the world, and you protect your child from anything, and I'm really proud. I've never sworn in front of my kids, and I swear a lot. Like, don't worry, not on your show.
That's all right.
If I'm out with my friends or if it's just me and my husband, and I will swear, I have absolute gutter mouth, but I have never sworn in front of my children. Even if, when you're driving and you accidentally miss the turn off, I'll be like, flip. Like, I would never, ever, ever, like, ever. So even though you protect your children, you still never know what someone's going to say in the playground, what they're going to see on a screen. So the sex and relationships one is an interesting one, because I think if we avoid talking about these conversations and these topics, we're doing young people a disservice, aren't we? Because at some point they are going to see something, they're going to learn about something. And if they're not sure what it is, that's when it's going to be upsetting for them and distressing. We need to help in an age-appropriate way.
So I have a couple of things on that. I'm thinking it's almost like the 2016 to 2020 era was like the rise of social media and the fear of insecurity and anxiety and depression. And it almost seems that post 2020, again, my wife and I have been together for almost a decade now. So I haven't had any Pardon?
Congratulations.
Well, thank you. But like it almost seems like that's gone into the dating app world now, where like that's kind of the thing we don't really talk about. Like we kind of figured out the problems with social media, but now it's like, how do you teach students about relationships that aren't started with one decision with your finger? Like, how do you make it not seem that small? So I guess two things. How do you create that space where those conversations are able to be had properly, like in a safe space, like you mentioned? What does that conversation look like when that safe space hasn't been created? And what are the things, like, obviously without getting like too specific, about like sex and relationships that should almost be more a part of the healthier, normal discussion at that level?
Yeah, so a lot to unpack there.
Yeah. I didn't mean to throw 9 questions at you there, but
It's good. I'll try to remember. How we create a safe space for our young people. I think the top thing is showing that you're a real person and showing that you respect them as a real person, because the teachers, you've already said you didn't have the best school experience. Those teachers who didn't even learn your name, or the teachers who get your name wrong, like for me, that's an instant red flag. You don't even know me. I remember once a teacher sent home a school report that they obviously didn't know me at all. They were like, oh yeah, she loves sport. I was like, no. Like, they don't even know me. So I think the first thing is about entering into your classroom as a mutual partner, showing that you're human. So again, we see a big problem in the UK. Our whole education system is based on Victorian values. The whole thing is based on this idea of the teacher as the holder of the power at the front of the classroom, who should be flawless, who should know everything, and the pupil should be passive. And even now, you see this echoed in so many classrooms where the teacher, would never dream of revealing anything about their home life or making a mistake. And it's definitely, you have to show the people in the classroom that you're human too. Don't be afraid to share a time you've been upset and how you overcame it, or a conflict you had. And this I think opens the communication, because they see that you understand. If you're relatable, then they can relate to you. So there needs to be something there. Again, no oversharing. We don't want to overshare with the children, but just showing that you're a human and
not sharing details, but lessons, barrier. I think is the big thing.
Yeah. It's definitely just about putting yourselves on the same playing field.
And so I guess, how would you respond to that teacher who gets your name wrong and says you like sport, and they try to talk to you about like relationships? Like, I guess, how are you viewing that teacher that you don't really have a connection with when you're trying to get into that territory?
Yeah, I mean, we all feel wounded when someone doesn't know us, right? And so I guess then I imagine I probably would have been on the back row laughing. I probably would have been that student heckling, because if you don't have the respect, like, that's the cornerstone of education, isn't it? Respect, I think. So if they don't have respect for me, why would I have respect for them? And
wound
something
is a hilarious word there.
Yeah, something is definitely lost if you don't have that mutual respect. If you don't take time to build it as well, we have to appreciate respect has to be earned, trust has to be earned in the classroom. And you've got to just put in time to get to know your children, know your young people or adults, I now teach adults, put in time to get to know them and care about them. And then they're going to care about you and what you're saying.
But yeah, I think I'm the worst at discipline. Like I what's the word I'm looking for? I commend my former teachers because I was never like I wouldn't be rude to you, but I'm always trying to troll and like get a laugh out of someone in the class. Like that was always my thing. Like I would never get sent out for like punching someone in class, but it was always just, okay, Clark, we've had enough of you for today. Take a seat
You were
outside.
like everyday low level corruption.
Just causing slight anxiety and the raising of shoulders in my teachers every day, I think. But literally last night I was on Facebook and I showed my wife a video and I was like, it was like a close-up photo of a spider. I'm like, this is crazy. And she was like going like this and looking at it. I'm like, what are you doing? She's like, I'm expecting a pop-up or something to scare me here. Like you're trying to troll me. I'm like, I'm actually not. Like it's just a video. So I guess
Was it just a close-up of a spider?
yeah, like it was still kind of scary, but I guess she thought it was going to be like something like the car going through and the green monster pops up, but I don't know. That
She
was
knows you. She obviously knows you. So where do you think that came from, that behavior when you were at school?
I think just trying to be seen. I think that was all it was. I think not that like I had very loving parents, but I think in that social setting, I thought trying to be funny was the best thing I had going for me, if that made sense. Like that was kind of what I wasn't really the smartest kid, so I was like, okay, that's where I can get value in the classroom, is trying to like bump my peer relationships, not my academic relationship with myself. I would say it was kind of probably what that was. But it's also, I mean, you got your like I didn't go to a very big elementary school. There's only one grade 6 class. So all your friends that have been in there for 2 years, like you're all there. Like I don't know. It's kind of a different, like it's its own silo almost, where it's just that's the culture you've built with yourself and your peers, and yeah, it was.
You've got a reputation. Well,
then you get that's the thing. Like you almost kind of, even if other people haven't given you the reputation, you almost like that's what your reputation is. So you continue to try to act in that way. But then you get 19% in grade 7, then it doesn't go very well. So I mean, there's work to be done, no matter.
It's a teachable moment. But I think, Lucas, you said like the two best words there, like the 2 reasons why we do see poor behavior. Obviously, we know behavior is always because of an unmet need. But the 2 things you said, like to be seen and to be valued, like that is what it is. So if you're seeing your student, if you're valuing your students, you're already making that safe space to have the conversation because they feel part of your classroom community. And it's when we feel like we're on the edge or we're not quite in the community, that's when we're going to heckle. That's when we're going to disengage. That's when whatever you say, I'm not going to care, even if it's something useful for me, because I don't care about you as a teacher. So it's definitely, and even with adults, I can see the students, when you put in time to get to know them, to remember, they'll come to you and tell you something that's happened at home. Maybe they've broken up with a partner. Maybe someone's died in the family. Next time you see them, you just check in and say, how's that going? How are you feeling about what happened? And showing you remember them. And it is hard because our brains are so busy. But if you can just remember those little bits about them as humans, that's honestly, it's going to do you like the total, I don't know the word, like it's going to set the whole pathway for your partnership together as a teacher and a learner, because they know that you care about them.
And I guess something I'm kind of realizing that I do without realizing that I do it right now is that it's obviously cliche. It's like greet your student at the door is kind of the classic like classroom management tip for like day 1 of education. But I'll always ask students how their weekend was. And I'm like what video games are you playing? And then as you get closer to the end of the week, it's like, well, what are you doing this weekend? Like it's always just keeping in touch. To me, it's just making conversation just because like, why not? But I guess maybe I don't realize that actually like gives us kind of a human side. I'm like, oh, I went to this with my niece and nephew and my wife. It kind of gives me like, oh, this.
Yeah. So you
share,
you share some of the stuff you're doing?
All the time. Yeah.
That's lovely.
Like, I'm like, oh man, I was playing Warzone, Call of Duty. I got absolutely destroyed. And they're like, what? Like, who is this guy? Like, you're not supposed to be doing that. Like, fine, it's fine. But then sometimes I just talk to teachers from the UK for fun, but why not? Who doesn't? But so I guess to kind of go on to the next phase here, I would say something you've talked a bit about is imposter syndrome. which probably my favorite topic. I feel like I've kind of maybe hit the nail on the head on this a few times, but I can't remember where specifically I came across this when looking through your work, but it came up about student imposter syndrome. So I guess what can you kind of add to that idea? Because I've never thought about students feeling like an imposter in my presence. I've only thought about being an imposter in their presence.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think it's more visible with adult learners because now most of my students are, 18 to 60 generally, and they're better at verbalizing how they're feeling. They're more able to tell you that, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm doing. But I think we all feel like imposters most of the time. And again, it comes back to if you've created a scenario where they can tell you how they're feeling, maybe you say we're going to do a group presentation. And they're not just going to sit there quietly and do it, but they're going to say, oh my gosh, Poppy, like, I'm really nervous about public speaking, or I don't know if I've got the skills to do this. Then you can actually come back to them and say, why do you feel that way? What have you done before that you can draw upon? And it's easier to address. So even with younger children, there's like so many good ways you can do it. One way we do it at university is we have something called a manual of me. And when students first come to us in September, you've probably done similar things. When they come in September, and you can do it anyway, even with a blank piece of paper or on a device, they make a poster about themselves. So like, how do you learn best? What are your strengths, like in the classroom? What are your strengths outside of the classroom? What are your hobbies? So doing something like that, then when they have those moments of feeling like an imposter, you can be like, wait a minute, like, remember what you said on your manual. You said you're good at talking to other people. So you do have a good, intrapersonal skill. So it's about sometimes just being reminded. And I think a lot of it comes back to our own childhood, doesn't it? And then if you're a true crime fan, but every time I watch true crime, with my husband, we always go, definitely something happened in their childhood. Like it always, Jeffrey Dahmer, we were like, what is it? And then you find out the reason he loves it is because the only thing his dad ever did with him was pick up some roadkill and let him dissect it.
Yeah.
It always comes back to childhood. And I think with a lot of our students at any age, it's going to come back to when they were younger, they maybe didn't always have that cheerleader. They didn't always have the positive voice at home, or they didn't even have the positive voices at school, even in the previous year group. So it's just about getting them to reflect on how they're feeling and actually that they probably have got those skills or the capacity to develop the skill. But yeah, anxiety with adults is super, super real. And mental health with adult students is the biggest barrier to their learning.
So I guess, because I'm trying to think of now you've got me reflecting. Oh no. When I first went to university.
Where did you go? Which university did you go to?
So I went to the University of Calgary and did like the history, poli-sci, double major, all that fun stuff. But like I remember attending my first seminar course, and the way that I ended up doing my degree was like, I didn't realize how few courses a major actually was, if that makes sense. Like I remember of 120 credits, you only needed like 48 to be like considered a major done or something like that. I can't remember. So really, I'm like, well, like what do I do with the other 72 courses or credits here? And that's why I added the poli-sci major after. Anyway, so by like the end of my fourth semester in my second year, I'm like 20 years old still. I'm doing all my senior level history seminar courses with like 5,000 word papers and like year with 8 other people. So, but it's only because I just fast tracked it because I thought like in my head, okay, if I'm doing a major, all my courses have to be like this. So I just filled the requirement quickly.
Amazing.
No, you're triggering another memory. But I remember it was the Great Patriotic War. So the Soviet Union, like World War II focus and his name was Alexander Hill. Great professor. Like he's one of the smartest men I've ever met. But I had to give like a 15-minute presentation in their class in like the 5th week or something for my major project. And it's the only time I've ever had a panic attack. It was like the night before, and I don't even know if it was a panic attack, but like the next day I was so unorganized. Like I just didn't know how to do this. Like I'm not used to speaking in front of people, and it didn't go as horribly as I think. But as soon as it was done, I was like, I need to go for a walk. Like they did a break anyway, but apparently when I left the room, he said to the rest of the class, he was like, I think Lucas is glad that's over.
Well, at
I
least
was
he
like,
was
you are,
great. At least he was sensing your vibe. He was in
yeah,
tune.
he was good about it. And like looking back on it, I was probably like sweating bullets. Like it was just not good at all. But you're making me think about, I was so much more comfortable in high school because I was just like, it was just my friends. That was just who I was like working with. Like to talk out in class, I was always trying to like shoot the shit anyway. So I was like, oh, it's all good. Like I can just answer this question or try to answer it. If I fail, it's not a big deal. But now the stakes are so much higher. So I guess how do you do any like preparation for your students to kind of prepare for those stakes at all? Like how do you prepare them for that?
It's so hard. It's so hard. And I think what's amazing in your story is, and a lot of people say to me, are people more anxious now than ever? Because it seems that way. Are we just better at talking about it? Some people challenge that we talk about it too much. It makes people more anxious. Like the amazing thing from your story is, although you felt, so distressed about doing the presentation, you still went in there and you nailed it. You did it. I don't know if you nailed it, but you did it. Like you did
I
it.
got like a B plus on it. So I was like, that's good.
You nailed it. Okay. But I think part of the problem is those students who then become so worried and so anxious that they don't show up. So I'll see students who probably felt the same as you. They're human like you. They felt the same as you, but something in them stops them. And I think part of the problem is, we need to normalize anxiety as something we all feel, but it's so difficult because it's so subjective. And there's no way you can show how you feel when you're anxious and judge if it's the same. But I've had students who, they message me 9 o'clock in the morning and say, Poppy, I just feel so anxious. I can't come to campus. And then I'll say to them, but you want to be a teacher. If you're too anxious to come, with a coffee and sit in a lecture theatre, where
It's
you've
like
not
my
got to do
favorite thing
anything,
to do.
how are you going to stand in front of a class of 30 young people who are bringing their trauma and baggage and needs? And so I do give a bit of that tough love because I think some people think teaching is just an easy pathway. And I do try and say, do you know what? If you think uni is hard, if you think being a university student is hard, maybe teaching isn't for you. But it is really hard. And anxiety is very real. But I think it's about normalizing what we can handle and how, as you say, you obviously developed some strategies, breathing or whatever you did to go in there, perform for Professor Hill. That's what we need to normalize, is talking about it, naming it, and then getting through it instead of withdrawing from it. And so even with adults, it's very much just about that, trying to give them the skills. And so the ways we prepare, for example, most of my students hate, if I say we're going to do a group presentation, they probably felt like you, because there's so much going on. You've got to talk to other people. You've got to work with other people. You've got to communicate. It's much harder than just on your own. So we'll do things like the first time, maybe they'll do something in groups online. So it takes away, the human element of being in the room. They just have to post on a discussion board or something. Or we'll do, instead of presenting in a room, the first time in the semester, you are going to record it and you just submit the audio recording, or you narrate a PowerPoint. But then once you have those skills and hopefully you see you can do it, then the next time I'm going to want you in front of the class and talking. So you try to give them baby steps, but at the end of the day, the real world doesn't always give you, that soft transition. And I think we're doing a disservice if we do always give our students those easy ways, but it's so hard and it's so complex, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I think the lesson I've learned from them, because I remember I had my PowerPoint made, but I think I probably had like 90 different facts of things that happened. I'm like, this is a 10-minute presentation. Like, why do I have 90 things on it? So, well, no, like you're almost, because you're trying to not look stupid, you're trying to put too much into it. So when really I probably could have gotten away with like 5 to really like hammer home and like just get out of your own way and tell the story. Like that's kind of what I've learned of, especially like with history specifically, in front of a professor and being the youngest one. But I don't really mind I don't mind speaking to like peers and equals, if that makes sense, anymore. But yeah, if I had to go into like speaking in front of professors, I'd probably feel the same feelings again. But who knows?
And that'd be totally normal. I try and tell my students, the fact that you're so anxious means that you want it. It means that you care.
Yes.
Try and just flip that and see it as a positive,
All right, so I'll try not to keep you for too much longer, but there's a couple more things I want to go into. First, I saw that you were an inside-out prison exchange practitioner. Can you please tell me more, elaborate, like what is this? How did it come about? And like, what have you learned from that experience?
So have you heard of Inside Out?
I really haven't. I'm assuming it's some sort of like maybe working to kind of reintegrate them into the public. Is that like the right track?
Not quite, but
Okay.
this scheme itself, and there are also lots of things called Inside Out, but this was actually one of the perks of COVID for me because I'd wanted to do this training for so long, but it's in Philadelphia in the US. And so I'd never had, the money to go over there and do the course. But in COVID, they began delivering the Inside Out course online.
Cool.
And I applied for some funding for my university. I was a lecturer in education. And I said, I would love to do this course if there's any chance. And I won some funding. So they put me on the online course. So I didn't have to go to Philadelphia, which was great.
Mm-hmm.
And they designed this incredible program where we've talked a lot about dissolving barriers today, right? This one's about dissolving the barriers between people that are incarcerated and people that are out. And what they do is an incredible program. For example, say I'm teaching a module on child psychology, which is something I lecture a lot in. An Inside Out module would be where I would have 15 of my students from my university and 15 students inside a prison. So 15 incarcerated students. And I take my 15 students into the prison setting and teach all 30 students together. So it's about dissolving the boundary because when you're in there, everyone's a student. Everyone's just a student. So the benefit for the prison is that they're having someone, who's a specialist in that area to come in and teach the module. And then the benefit for all of the students, I think, is to just open our eyes and open our perspective, because I think, if you think someone's got a criminal record, they're in prison, you already have that black mark against their name. But when the students are all in there and they're talking, and a lot of the Inside Out activities they're all about communication. Whatever you're teaching, they all start with icebreakers and things like that, where there's a really cool one, the wagon wheel. This is actually just fun to do in your own classroom as well. So the wagon wheel is where you put one ring of students in a circle in the middle of the room and one ring of students in the outside, and they're each facing each other, and then they talk to each other, and then the wheel moves around. So one by one, all the students get to talk to everyone in the wheels, like two moving wheels. So a lesson would start with an icebreaker, for example, talk about something you're proud of that you've achieved. And the students will talk together, and then you move the wheel to meet more people, kind of like a matchmaking, speed dating. So lots of really cool things that are all just about communication, builds up their confidence, and then you do some learning. I finished that training in COVID. Just so happens that I've just moved to university, so I'm still waiting to find the perfect setting. I've done some amazing work with HMP ISIS, which is a men's prison in South London. The hope is that we'll start delivering an Inside Out program with the prison in the future. But I think anything like that, where we're also checking in our judgment and our prejudice, kind of what we were saying at the start about stereotypes. When you're in there, you're just with a room of learners, and you realize that everyone's had a different journey in this life through where they're born or who their parents are, or, so many factors in our life bring us to where we are. And actually, one thing that I'll just mention, I can't remember her name, but there's one of the most powerful videos I've ever seen on YouTube, where this woman goes and speaks to some people that are in prison. And oh my gosh, maybe you'll know it, Lucas, actually. And they're all stood in a line, and she says something like, if someone was ever mean to you when you were a child, step forward. If someone ever hit you when you're a child, step forward. And you realize that basically everyone in this prison population has had a really traumatic childhood. They've been neglected, they've been abused. And so is it any wonder that they ended up, having to look for crime to get money, or became addicted to substances? It really is incredible. And I think if you haven't been in a prison or worked with prison communities, like, it's so eye-opening that they are just people, and they've just had really difficult journeys. Again, I'm generalizing because there are some crimes, for which I would not say. But yeah, I think it's the same thing as when I was teaching in all different schools, or even adults and kids. Learners are learners, and you just have to acknowledge what they bring with them, but also make a space for them as a learner as well to grow despite everything they're bringing.
That was very interesting. So I guess is there any sort of preparation for the students that you're with? Like, what does that kind of look like? Like, you don't want to be like you're preparing them to see these monsters, because obviously that's the opposite of the point of the program. But like, what are some of the kind of different conditions you kind of expect them for? And I guess what maybe even surprised you about, like, sorry, have you
Yeah.
practiced the program?
Yeah, so only with the program itself,
Okay.
but hopefully starting next year, my
Yeah.
own class. But the one thing that you learn is how important that you're taking the right students onto the program in the first place. Both sides of the prison wall. So taking the right people within the prison and the right people without the prison who have the right vision and values for the course. So, for example, you would have an application process at the university to check that, as you say, they're not just students who just want something fun that they can post about on their social media.
Yep.
I went in a prison, but you want to make sure that you're choosing people that are going into it because they're interested in social justice and equality and equity, and people that are coming at it from, a human perspective and want to learn together. So it's all about, I guess, if I had to say the one thing, it's just about being human. And the whole program, I mean, I'll have to update you when I've actually delivered it.
Yes,
But
absolutely.
the thing from the training is just remembering that we're human, warts and all, and just trying to do the best with the tools we have to bring people together and to remove some of those stereotypes and those prejudices. And then from that to grow as people.
Yeah, I can imagine that being an extremely valuable experience as a student. Like, obviously as a teacher, that's going to be like a fascinating dynamic to teach in, but as a student being like we're just going to work on this assignment together. We're not going to focus on things we've done in the past. Like, we're just going to move forward, try to have a conversation and like drink coffee together. Yeah.
You should train on the program. That's what I'm going to say.
Honestly, it's you're piquing my interest for sure. So that's cool. Yeah, I'm definitely interested to learn more about that once you kind of get that in practice here.
Hey,
So I got a few more. Absolutely. So I've got a few more kind of big time quotes to finish us off here. I will say that teachers are, if nothing else, annoyingly humble. I find, like, when it comes to, again, in this process, like this podcast kind of started as wanting to learn from other teachers in my building and just hearing the fascinating stories about what they've done, what they've learned, and who they are. And there's just so much more that meets the eye with so many of them. So I guess it's kind of three kind of final questions I have. So the first one is, I was listening to a podcast. Actually, I don't know if you know Chris Williamson, like Modern Wisdom. He's like from he's from like a northeastern town in the UK, and he lives in the US anyway. But
I came out.
Yeah, he was talking about, like, does it grow corn? Like, does the thing you're talking to me about do just the fundamental thing of it helps me grow this food that I can eat? Like, rather than talking about theory, like kind of the practical things. So after maybe taking a course with you, what are some of the kind of actionable takeaways that you want people to take away from their time in your course or courses that you teach, generally speaking, to help them be a better teacher or even like better person, etc.?
I would just sum that up in just care about each other. And I think too often, particularly at university level, we're so worried about, assessment and metrics and student evaluation, but all of this rides on how well you connect with your students in the first place. When I left my last university, because I just moved universities, I found out who was taking over my job from me. And so they were looking after two cohorts of students, and they went, give me a tip. Like, how am I going to take over, your students? And I went, just care about them. Honestly, if you care about them, they'll come to you when they're worried. If you care about them, they'll ask you questions and not feel silly asking you. And so it really just has to come from that place of care. It's as simple as that. The problem as teachers is we don't always have time to put in the hours we need to care for people. But as you say, just making those moments of time, how was your weekend? What are you doing in the week? That's showing that you care because you're interested in them. So really, that's all it is. I don't care what we're learning about. I care that you enjoy being there, because that's more, you can Google anything you need to know in the world.
Yeah.
But what I need you to develop, what I need you to take away from my course is some confidence in yourself and a curiosity about the world and a desire to keep on being a lifelong learner. If you take those things away, I don't care if you forget everything that I taught you about Vygotsky and Piaget. You can Google that, or use any search engine.
Beautiful. So next one would be this is kind of like it's kind of the magic wand question. I would say like if you had 1 minute with the whole world listening and you could change one thing about the education system and they had to listen, what would it be?
Burn it. I would say I don't know
Goodbye.
so much about what you're doing in Canada. I don't know, but here in the UK, is it needs to start again. And when COVID happened, we really hoped that this was the start of a new era, that children would go back into our schools here in England, you know, with a focus on mental health and well-being. The day that my oldest son, went back to school, he came home. I went, "What did you do?" And he was doing SATs boosters, which is basically preparation for the year 6 exam. And I just thought, did we learn nothing, people? But the problem is the accountability for assessment. So, okay, maybe we don't need to burn everything, but let's just scrap assessments. Let's do that. Scrap assessments. We can just do, you know, visual check-ins every day how our children are growing and learning. But we just don't need these big standardized assessments. Certainly not in the primary school. Let's do that. Let's scrap assessment.
Yeah, like part of me almost thinks like I've gone back and forth on like maybe the end of high school like testing, like what do you want to know they know, but like I hear these like great like year 2 reading. I'm like, this is crazy stress for like, again, like it's not that serious, really. I don't know. That's again, that's kind of, I share that
That's where anxiety
perspective.
starts for some of those adult students. You know, the anxiety started as young as primary school, high school, where they've had exams in a poor situation.
It's like I'll never forget not knowing 6 times 8 when I was 8 years old. Like it was the most stressful time. But I can do like that's where the anxiety started. It's like, no, it's not
You just
48.
found Today you have found the root of all evil. Was that moment?
Everything's coming out here today.
That was us. Oh, it's something in
So
childhood. See,
yes, there's a lot more. Anyway, there was last one would be so kind of piggybacking on what you were saying there about like scrapping assessment. This is the last question I'll ask you for the day. You're again, everyone's humble. You're clearly a very successful person in the sense of like you're publishing books, you're speaking at universities, you're a pleasure to talk to, you're just a good human all around. One of the quote would be, "Do not let school get in the way of your education." So I guess what are some of the things that you think you've embodied and or learned that has helped you become successful that you wouldn't have learned in the classroom?
yeah. Do you know what? It's about the people. And I think that's what I've learned from any school that I've been to or that I've worked in. It's about the people you surround yourself with. And even now, even at my book launch yesterday, it was definitely about the people that show up for you. And I think the one thing, the hidden curriculum around everything else is about the people that you choose to spend your time with. Whether it's in a friendship circle or in the staff room, who you sit next to, like definitely. And this is the thing, I was talking to my children about this actually this morning, just giving your energy to the right people and the right things, because you're only one person. Being a teacher especially is exhausting because you're caring for so many people. So you really need to protect your energy. And again, it sounds really cheesy, but it's taken me a long time to learn it.
I love cheese.
You need to protect your energy and just give it to the right people and the right things. And that's really the thing that I'm learning now as I teach, where to direct that energy. So yeah, I would say if you learn, you know, spend time with good people and you'll learn good things and you'll learn good behaviors and how to look after each other. It's particularly, you know, important when you haven't always had that in your own home setting. So there's definitely something there, like learn just how to be a good person and a good friend, have a healthy relationship with yourself. That's the main thing. And if you spend time with the right people, you will be your authentic self as well. That's how you know. If you're being you, you're with your right tribe.
Love it. Beautiful. Dr. Poppy Gibson, thank you so much for coming on today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, from London to Canada.
Yes, across the pond.